obviously the media bias when it comes to, right-wing outlets and stuff like that skews it. But there's also just generally a bias in the media of putting the frame of the camera right
Yeah,
around the most violent or destructive thing. So
sure.
if you look at a map of Los Angeles, the entire protests, riots, whatever, are isolated to a couple blocks in downtown. And
Mm,
downtown Los Angeles is one neighborhood of the hundreds in Los Angeles.
right.
Um, and even then, you would have people, live streaming them like walking by City Hall, and there's just like a couple people hanging out here and there. You know what I mean? It's not like it was even that dramatic there, but yet that
Mm.
becomes the focus of countless hours of, coverage and viral images and stuff like that. Here, I'm in West LA, I'm in maybe like 10 miles west of there, and literally, I hadn't even seen a protester in West
Right.
LA. It was all downtown.
Hello, and welcome to Eric McElroy's American Exchange with me, Eric McElroy. Always surprises me how that works. This is the podcast where I dial across the pond to find out what is happening in my home country. Based here in London, where we've been very far away from some of the extremely exciting things that have been happening in the United States in the last 7 days, which feel like 7 years, since we saw the beginning of a huge round of immigration, customs, and enforcement officers doing different raids, starting from Home Depot into other workplaces throughout the United States, specifically in Los Angeles, which of course led to widespread protests against grabbing people that are, yes, some people call them illegal, other phrases to call them undocumented. The difference is important because a crime is when you go out and you break into someone's house, commit a robbery, that kind of thing. Overstaying your visa in the United States is not technically a criminal offense. It's usually a civil offense. Overstaying a visa is, of course, wrong. You need to have laws and rules and so on. What past administrations have not done when they've been deporting people 1.2 million under Trump, 1.2 million under Obama, 650,000 so on under Biden is usually they go after those quote unquote hardened criminals that Trump likes to talk about all the time. Well, that's changed now. ICE are going in, often without warrants, and grabbing people essentially off the streets. We saw multiple protests, specifically in Los Angeles, and so we thought, well, what's really happening in LA? You watch Fox News, the whole city's burning. Listen to Trump, it's gone. It's escape from LA. Not Kirk Douglas. Oh, the other guy, Kurt Russell, is there trying to make his way out of the city. So, what's really happening? Well, who better to turn to than Toby Muresianu? He's a friend of mine from the London comedy circuit who went back to America. Whatever, Toby, who has a life there and is settled in the Los Angeles area. And he's an advocate for housing reform in Los Angeles and California. And he's very much plugged into the political scene there. He's transitioned now less from stand up comedy and more into social media and being a social media advocate in a funny and entertaining and informative way. Had Toby on the podcast before, but he's there. He was at the No Kings protest, which happened on the 14th of June as a counter protest to Donald Trump's little birthday parade that he did. So it was great to catch up with Toby. He's been there right on the front lines of this the whole time to talk about what's really happening in Los Angeles, what led to the feeling of frustration within the people in the Los Angeles community, and a broader mood following the No Kings protest that went off largely successfully over the weekend in the US. So it's great to catch up with Toby. We also talk about his passion subject, which is housing. Check him out on all the social medias, which are in the description. And also, if you're watching this on YouTube, that's great. We're trying to grow our YouTube presence, but the podcast is still available as an audio form in all of the other podcast places out there, and the Spotify's and the Apple things and all that stuff. So we're everywhere. Enjoy us here. And if you are watching on YouTube, please make sure to, like it and subscribe and do that on the other platforms as well. Give us a review, share, because of course these things need to grow. And it's great to have the conversation. It's great to welcome Toby back to the podcast. So please enjoy Toby Muresianu. Well, I'm very excited for our guest because he is coming to us live from what I believe is his bunker in Los Angeles. He's there as a survivor.
Mhm.
I'm not sure, Toby. It's so good. I'm surprised we got internet connection. I know. I believe you. I hope there's not been too many casualties within your household when the last time you saw the sun was. But you were coming to us from the front lines in the town that once was Los Angeles. Toby, how are you
Well,
surviving?
well, I'm currently on fire, But
That's because you're
hopefully I can be able
hot.
to stay with
That's a
you
different
for.
issue.
Oh yeah. Hoping to make it through the podcast, one way or the other.
That's from your
Uh,
OnlyFans page. That's a different podcast, Toby. We can talk
oh,
about
that's
how
a
hot you are later. Right now, we're talking about how you are coming from the war torn,
yes.
end of the earth, hellhole, Democrat scum, Los Angeles, which is
Mhm.
you're only alive today thanks to Donald Trump and the Marines. Is that, am I casting this correctly? What the last few weeks have been like for you?
Yes. The National Guard pulled me out of a Waymo, right before the barbarian hordes descended upon it, and fortunately, delivered as an American once I showed them my
Yeah.
passport. Hopefully.
Good. Good. Well, I'm going to
Uh,
splice that out and put it out there on socials just so that I can build up a right wing following. But maybe now we can turn the page and we can find out the truth. So you are there you are in the front lines. You do live in Los Angeles. What's reality, Toby?
okay. Well, reality, first of all, is that there have been a lot of ICE raids here. So that
Hmm.
is, often the focus on the protests serves to obfuscate the reason for the protests in the first place.
Hmm.
But there have been a lot of ICE raids here. So, LA is one of the places where there's the highest population of undocumented people within the United
Hmm.
States. And it's been in the crosshairs of Donald Trump for some time. And they have launched a series of raids, and it's affected people. It's like there have been a lot of videos of people getting, pulled out of cars, people who were, you know, just standing outside a Home Depot are being like swooped up. And this is a big departure from how it used to be, where they actually like pick who they want to deport and
Hmm.
develop a name and a case instead of
Yep.
just like rounding them up. But because inevitably, and we've seen this happen before, there are US citizens or legal residents who get caught up in these things and end up
Yep.
being arrested and detained, if not deported to El Salvador. So, um, you know, the city of Los Angeles, I think, by generally being a peaceful and prosperous city, I mean, it has its flaws, and I'm actively
Hmm.
engaged at the local level on, trying to remedy them. But the reason we rallied around our undocumented immigrants is because the narrative of them being violent criminals is just completely false. I
Hmm.
mean, they are criminals and you can deport them. I'm not sticking up for criminals if they're violent, etc. But like,
Yeah.
it's very common that, you know, I've worked on construction crews and there's people there who are probably undocumented.
Hmm.
If you have a housekeeper, if you have a landscaper, if you have a gardener, if you're eating at a restaurant, there's probably someone who's working there who's undocumented, not necessarily, but it's not uncommon because this is
Yeah.
where people live and they're part of our community. I send my kids to LAUSD, preschool, elementary school,
Hmm.
and they're undocumented people are entitled to an education, and so
Yeah.
my kids' friends, and their parents, might be undocumented, even while they are American citizens and stuff like that. So it's a mixed society.
Hmm.
And uh, the outrage you see in LA is based on basically people using and Trump using this false narrative of we've got to get these violent criminals who are terrorizing society out of here and
Yeah.
plucking away people who we interact with on a daily basis and who, help our society run and are, a part of our city. So in response to these raids, there were a number of protests that arose. Uh, Within that, there were some like, a couple blocks of rioting.
Hmm.
Um, Generally speaking, I mean, there were like three or four Waymos which are burned, which
And
one I
I'm just
cannot
going to put you
support.
down. I want to put you down as you're a pro rioter and destruction of property. Is that right? So,
I am pro Waymo, so I will argue for Waymo. This is the debate that they
so
want you
these
to
are
have.
driverless because we don't have Waymo in the UK. So any UK listeners, so Waymo are driverless taxis. Is that right?
Yeah, so in the first world now, there are
Ouch! Oh, that one stung.
Well, we're not for very much longer that we're first
Yeah.
world. But yeah. So basically,
Driverless cars. Yeah.
driverless cars. It works
Okay.
like an Uber essentially. You call it and it comes up, picks you up, door unlocks, you walk in, drives you to where you want to go, and they're good.
No. I'm not comfortable with that. All right, so I took us off topic. So there were some those were set on there was some set on fire. There was some isolated rioting within the overall protests. I
Yeah.
mean, so Trump and his acolytes are saying all of Los Angeles, all 500 square miles of Los Angeles County are on in upheaval and you can't go out. But you're there. What is really happening,
According to
or
the
what was
media,
happening?
we just burned down like a couple months ago. So where are these people coming from, even?
Yeah,
You know, and it's just I think it's obviously the media bias when it comes to, right-wing outlets and stuff like that skews it. But there's also just generally a bias in the media of putting the frame of the camera right
yeah,
around the most violent or destructive thing. So
sure.
if you look at a map of Los Angeles, the entire protests, riots, whatever, are isolated to a couple blocks in downtown. And
Mm,
downtown Los Angeles is one neighborhood of the hundreds in Los Angeles.
right.
Um, and even then, you would have people, live streaming them like walking by City Hall, and there's just like a couple people hanging out here and there. You know what I mean? It's not like it was even that dramatic there, but yet that
Mm,
becomes the focus of countless hours of, coverage and viral images and stuff like that. Here, I'm in West LA, I'm in maybe like 10 miles west of there, and literally there is, I never saw um, until this last weekend when they had the No Kings protests, which were,
yep.
overwhelmingly peaceful and everything like that. And I think that's been universally recognized um, because those were neighborhood specific more,
Mm,
or some protesters there. But before then, I hadn't even seen a protester in West
right.
LA. It was all downtown. So like I'm taking the bus across town and driving, kids here and there. It's just business as usual over 99% of the city. Now, I
Okay.
will say that now because there is a federal building in
Hmm.
West LA, there are actually Marines stationed around it now.
So the
Um,
Marines or the National Guard?
I believe they're Marines. I'm not
So
100% sure.
and just for anybody who's not from the states or listening to understand, so the National Guard are state-run, or state-controlled, typically military that they do sometimes serve overseas in the military, but they're meant to be sort of focused on state issues, and they often help in natural disasters, and they're controlled by the governor. Trump nationalized those. We could talk about that in a second. But then the Marines, this is the U.S. military, which is typically not deployed legally within the United States to deal with other Americans.
Yeah.
So
So
to see Marines on the street in your neighborhood, that's insane.
yeah, I mean, it's just like kooky, but it also looks so out of place because
Hmm.
there's literally not even any protesters around there. Like they're just like hanging out by the entrance to this like random office building and like checking people's DoorDash orders. It's a farce, It's like I mean, and I guess if you're in the military, from what I hear, you do your share of like boring watch duty or whatever. So I guess it's just
Sure.
par for the course in that respect. But like, it's just, I mean, it's any like relatively residential, some commercial neighborhood, and you just
Mm,
imagine, like people set up in Humvees, with assault rifles, like they're in, Iran or something. And it's like it's silly. I mean, I don't. It's less threatening to me than it is comical, but
mm,
it's still like I guess there is just knowing that this is a step that could be the first of similar steps
right.
is unnerving. You know, so you laugh at it at first, but there's also, you wonder about what is to come.
Yeah, I mean, it is. Is this? I mean, a lot of I think. Well, Gavin Newsom, your governor, has said pretty specifically, and a lot of people have that this was, provocative by intent to go into communities that they knew would be upset, to aggressively send in these enforcement agents, and to do it in democratically led cities when there's loads of undocumented workers in Texas.
Yeah.
Haven't heard about any of these ICE raids in Texas. There's been some in Florida. I've been hearing about Florida, so I don't know why that's been coming out more. Maybe because he's pissed off at DeSantis or something. But yeah, I mean it's raising those stakes, and then it's a slippery slope if you can suddenly deploy the Marines without really any due cause.
Yeah, that was what really freaked me out in the beginning was just it felt so manufactured. It felt
Hmm.
like, okay, we're going to provoke a backlash, and then no matter whether it's one block, whether it's 100 blocks, we're going to get the whole media outrage apparatus, looking at these are violence, protesters and looters and rioters, and then we're going to use that to build justify sending in the National Guard, and then you know, the next time there's a protest, and maybe this time it isn't about immigration. Maybe it's about, hey, we tried to, steal an election, or we
Yeah.
we did not, whatever. The National Guard is just like a go-to move because that ice has already been broken. Um,
I
yeah,
think so.
that worries
I
me.
want to come to No Kings in a second, but with ICE, I mean, it's not like there weren't people being deported. So under, I have it written down somewhere, but around 1.2 million per term were deported by Obama. It did dip down a little bit under Biden to around 650,000 people were deported. Trump's first term, he hit about Obama levels of 1.2 million deported his first term. So it's not like they weren't deporting people before, but they weren't, out on the streets or these raids I don't remember happening or, this aggressiveness to it, but they still managed to get 1.2 million people out of the country. So is it, I don't know if, it's just it's an incredible so this is done deliberately to scare people, do you think? Is that what's the goal?
So, I mean, I'm not privy to these conversations, but there was reporting on this, and
Hmm.
what the word is that Stephen Miller, who has been xenophobic
Yeah.
virulently since he was a kid. You can hear him railing against, like, literally, he's from LA, he's from Santa Monica, and like railing against like Latinos in his high school and stuff like this. So he's just like, can I say shithead on
You
this
can say
podcast?
whatever the fuck you want, Toby.
All right. He's just been like a little shithead for his entire life. And now he has connived his way into being in the position where he can actually act out on his shitty fantasies.
Yeah.
And so he has been, you know, trying to be more aggressive. And
Hmm.
apparently they were like for the first couple months or whatever of the Trump administration 2.0, they were actually deporting fewer people than were
Yeah.
deported under Biden. And that made him very mad. So basically he has brought in like the heads of ICE and whatever and Border Patrol, these sorts of things, and been like, basically, we're just gonna, take out all of the safeguards to prevent, deporting legal immigrants, deporting Americans, violating people's rights, etc. And instead of like trying to compile lists and do things by the book, we're just gonna go outside Home Depot or wherever we think illegal immigrants might be and we round them in a van. If people have messed up on their paperwork once 10 years ago, we're not, we're gonna use that as a pretext to deport them, even if they have an American
Hmm.
family, which is the type
Yeah.
of thing that can have been done under, even Trump one or Biden or whatnot. And so they're just like trying to hit these quotas and juice the numbers. And and they're also, I guess, one of the big blocks that had been in place to prevent mass deportations was the political reality that you're sort of alluding to in Texas, which is that
Hmm.
there's a lot of people who are undocumented who work in businesses that are important to state economies and stuff like
Yeah.
that. So a lot of, people can rail against illegal immigration in the abstract, but when it's like, okay, we're going to deport all of the workers on American farms or the people who are producing, XYZ manufactured goods, then
Hmm.
all of a sudden, you get pushback from Republican donors, from Republican governors, from, people who are, responsible for uh, who represent the under-discussed side of illegal immigration, which is how much their economy relies on it.
Yeah. And
Um,
well, and we've been finding that out with Trump kind of backing off this week and saying, "Oh, actually, we're going to stop raiding farms in some other places." But then apparently, I've just been reading reports on this today as we're recording this, is that Stephen Miller overrode that and has now said we have to go back into those same businesses. So, you know, I mean, they talked, well, I mean, I would imagine in general, we're going to have lots of conversations over the next God knows how long about, allegedly Biden was addled and didn't know what was happening. But
mhm.
Trump seems pretty addled as well. So who's really running the show here?
Yeah, well, I mean, Trump was born addled. He's
It's
addled. I don't
one of
think
his
it's decline. I
charms, isn't
think it's
it?
plateau.
Yeah.
That's the problem. But like, yeah, I think the thing is, Trump notoriously like parrots whatever the last person he talked to said, you
Yeah.
know, and he's mercurial. He'll change opinions one week to the next. Miller is evil. He's just
Yeah.
he has these same beliefs that he's had since he was a kid. He's
Yeah.
a really shitty, cruel person who delights in sadism or whatever, and racism and xenophobia. And I don't use those terms lightly, but that's
Hmm.
calling a spade a spade. And the thing is, he's one of the few people who's weathered Trump 1 and then came in for Trump 2.
Yeah.
He's good at staying in Trump's good graces, which is not easy, and
Hmm.
he knows how to play the game. He knows
Yeah.
that he can keep an even keel and Trump will get distracted and he'll still be there as the voice of the presidential administration, directing these agencies and telling them what to do. So, I mean, is it possible Trump eventually overrules him again or whatever? Sure, but I mean, I see. I don't take a random Trump tweet as evidence of a change in policy until I see Stephen Miller not being in charge of that because it
Yeah.
seems he's the deputy who's in charge 90% of the time on this, and I don't think he's gonna suddenly do any sort of change in his view. He sees immigration as a much bigger threat or a
Yeah.
bigger problem, than he does the economy. He does any of these other concerns that to Trump's approvals.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, it's effective for all right-wing politicians to scare, the other, the other, the other, and then that allows them to do their other things. I mean, I've heard some reporting, I don't know if you agree with this, that one of the reasons why they were struggling with the numbers at the beginning of this Trump 2.0 is because of actual aggressive deportations under Trump and maybe slightly less under Biden, but even under Obama, that these alleged criminals and rapists and asylum escapees that Trump always goes on about, a lot of them the easy ones have been caught and deported. And so they're out of the actual criminals. And I think what the right obviously do as well is they take an undocumented worker, which of just a visa overstay is a civil offense. It is not a crime, a criminal act. It's against the rules, but it's different than, robbing someone or stealing or other stuff.
It
So
isn't the
now they've
same.
expanded that to these people I mean, even Trump didn't say he was going to go after, your nanny. That's
Mhm.
not what he didn't. I mean, we knew that he was going to do that, but he didn't say that he would.
Well, the thing about Trump is he says everything all the time. And so
Yeah.
people kind of read what they want to. And so did he say he was going to do mass deportations? Yeah. And there's
Yes.
not that many criminals. But when he's asked about it, he focuses on criminals because it's easier to make the criminal a case against criminals, and no one sticks up for criminals, and no one should stick up for criminals.
Yeah.
But um, but then, you can't have mass deportations if you're just doing criminals. If you're doing mass deportations, 98% of that or whatever is going to be people with no criminal record or no meaningful one.
Right.
Um,
Other than overstaying their visa,
yeah, yeah.
which is
Um,
yeah is
and
against
the
the
other
rules,
the other
but
part of it is then a lot of people came over here legally, and then they are making them illegal through, rescinding the programs that they came in
yes.
under and declaring them no longer valid. Or maybe they find a paperwork error from 10 years ago, even though they have, gotten approval in the meantime, or they're going through the appropriate process for legalization. So it's not, what counts as an illegal immigrant is also, um, different under this current rubric than I think it had been in previous years.
Yeah. Basically, the criteria now is being brown. That makes a big difference. I mean, if we look at how they brought, the only asylum seekers that we brought in under the Trump 2.0 are from white South Africans.
Yeah.
I just, it's not, the thing is, it's not even subtle. There's no more dog whistle. It's just,
Yeah. It's not like it's
it's just,
beyond parody, you know? It's like
it's just,
this is
which is not good for us when we try to do comedy, satire. Oh, God. Um, Okay, so because you were right in the thick of this, and I know, and so this led up to what was already in the schedule or in the diaries, we would say here in the UK, for the No Kings protest, which was scheduled to be a counter protest to Trump's birthday party slash celebration of the U.S. Army. Turning 250 years old, and of course, I'm sure neither of us would say that we begrudge the army a celebration. The army is great. We support the troops. All of those things, but it was being manipulated and done for Trump's birthday.
Mhm.
Everybody knew that. He's wanted to have this Soviet style march for years.
Yeah.
So the No Kings was there, and No Kings. I mean, so you marched for the No Kings in LA. I mean, how do you think that all of what was happening with ICE and the rollout of the Marines and the rollout of the National Guard, how did that change the energy behind No Kings from your perspective?
Yeah, so I think, No Kings had been scheduled for a while, but I think it was also kind of in the right place at the right time where people were
Hmm.
looking for a way to push back. And so it was kind of in the perfect position as both something that was nationwide. So this was a little
Yep.
bit different than many other things where it's like in a protest in DC or in LA or whatever. It's like even in LA, there were probably 12, 15. Like it was very local. And so a cool thing about that is like nearly everyone had a place to go and do it. It wasn't
Hmm.
just cities. So I went to one near me in West LA, and it was, yeah, there was a lot of people there. I was, I can't say that I, have a perfect comparison, but what I would have expected
Hmm.
this to turn out based on my experience with, protests and the first Trump term and stuff like that. I would have expected it to be, I don't know, 100 people, 150, something like that. And it
Hmm.
was, I would guess, some thousands.
Wow.
Um, and this is just West LA, and the big one is
And
downtown.
I saw the pictures of it. You came out with your family, with your
Yeah.
kids. You weren't in fatigues and worried about getting attacked and getting set on fire. Like this was a happy, joyful, fun, not joyful in that we're excited about why we're protesting, but it wasn't, you didn't feel like it was dangerous if you took your young kids.
Yeah, it was very positive energy. I mean, this is another thing about it being local where it's like,
Yeah.
I probably wouldn't have taken my kids to downtown LA, which is where the, conflicts that happen, you never know. I don't want my kids to get tear gassed or whatever. But
It's
West
good for
LA
them.
is more, it's just pretty chill.
Yeah.
It didn't feel like that was going to be a big risk. And, if it had, I would have left. I don't want to endanger my
Yeah, yeah,
family,
of
but
course.
it was super red. In 2016, actually, when I was in DC for the Women's March, and it sort of reminded
Hmm.
me of that, where it's just like everyone is just like, you know, upbeat and chanting chants or singing songs or, firing each other up, taking photographs together. There's people like bringing out water and snacks and stuff like that. It was it was just a real morale boost. And I think and hope that it also um, helps organize, people. The
True.
2016, the Women's March, I think, did a lot to organize people ahead of the 2018 midterms, where
Hmm.
Democrats took back the House and stuff like that. And so I hope that it provides both a morale boost and a nexus of organization so that, um, you know, people are fired up and get more involved and keep that momentum going into the next election cycle.
And do you think, because I know well, obviously at the point where they put the curfew in downtown LA, there were some skirmishes. But for the most part, the day was peaceful and it was mostly peaceful across the vast majority of the country. And the estimates have been, I've seen between 5 to 12 million people. It was the largest domestic protest apparently in American history from independent sources. So do you think that since that, so this has only been a few days now, has there been a tonal shift? I mean, I've heard that the ice raids are going to continue and that they're ramping up again, but at the same time, having that many people come together, does that feel like, and especially compared to how much of a wet noodle the army, not to, again, this is not critical of the army because they were set up for this, but
Hmm.
it was a what we call in the UK, I believe this is a British phrase. I've been here too long, a damp squid. I don't think we say that in America, do we, Toby? Do we say
I think
damp squid in America?
uh,
I can't remember anymore. Been gone for too
I've
long.
never heard damp squid. Limp dick
Ah,
would I went with, which I guess is a similar
yeah,
visual,
yeah,
but
similar kind of thing. So his parade was a limp squid or whatever. We'll mix our metaphors, and then this was the biggest domestic protest of all time. Do you think that? I don't know. Is there a tonal shift, or is it still too soon to say because we're in the shadow of it right now?
I mean, I've incorrectly called too many tonal shifts to have any idea. This is where Trump loses them, you
This
know.
is the moment. Yeah,
I
that's
mean,
true.
you look at the floor and the ceiling for Trump are so narrow, right? It's like,
Yeah,
maybe he gets down to what, 39, or maybe he gets up to 46 or something like that, and
yeah,
in a month to month thing, it's like plus or minus 1% approval, which I mean, if you think about it, if you had 100 people, it's like one person changing their mind, right?
hmm,
So it's, I wouldn't say it's, you know, any sort of sea change, but it is definitely like, it's a few news cycles of a win. And I think that it also helps that like he was really doing this, orchestrating these raids and backlash and protests and stuff to rally his support.
yeah,
And now you look at what it's done over the last 2 weeks, even when it comes to specific issues that he's usually stronger on, like immigration, and it's been declining. So I
yeah.
think he tried to do something and it backfired. And that's definitely a win, but it's a battle. It's not the war. Um,
Mm,
and so I'm excited about it. And I think it's also helped to, you know what, I think because his moves were so explicit with like, we're
mm,
gonna manufacture this, I think there's also been an increased awareness on the opposition side of tactics and
mm,
how to fight the battle in the media in a way that Trump has been very effective at and the right has been very effective at for the last couple of years. So, for example, like the first time when there were protests, there were a lot of people there who had, flags from Mexico or flags from
yeah,
Central America. And that created like a visual that he wanted, where it's like, we're kicking out these people. If they want to go, if they love Mexico so much, why don't they go back to Mexico? And I
yeah.
saw a real push in LA, like, hey, bring American flags to the protest, you know?
Sure.
And for a lot of people, and I got in discussions about this, and some people were just like, but, I'm I'm proud of being Mexican, like that's why I'm, even if I'm
Yeah,
not illegal or whatever, like I see it, that's the way. And like, but there were a lot of posts, there was a lot of discussion. And then when I went to the No Kings protest, it was like overwhelmingly people had American flags and stuff like that. And, you know, people were more, there was not that there was much violence in the beginning, but there was less, substantially
mm,
less this time. And I think that those visuals helped the protest be better received over the
yeah,
country. And what I also see and have been trying to do is really keep the focus on the ICE raids that created it.
yeah,
Um, so they want to talk about some violent protester in front of a burning car. But when you share the images instead of like ICE, you know, violently arresting the husband of a pregnant woman,
yeah,
that hurts them. So
mm,
when you refuse to play their game and you instead push through on their vulnerable spots, I think that is a win for the opposition, and I'm also heartened to see people being able to have effective leadership of that messaging because for a long
mm,
time, people on the left have just been really leaderless or, it's been very hard to enforce like something like message discipline over
sure.
like, thousands and millions of people who all come with their own agendas. And I think that um, the effectiveness with which we were able to do that in the last couple of weeks speaks well to um, the ability to resist more effectively going forward.
Yeah, I think Democrats, bless us, we have a tendency to, if we're spending our time explaining why, well, of course you have a right to have a Mexican flag, and that's part of the First Amendment, and it's honoring the fact that you can be Mexico. It's not illegal to have a foreign country flag. I mean, if you wanted to point it out that Trump's protesters had Confederate flags when they stormed the Capitol and killed police officers, but yeah, in the meantime, blah 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 blah, blah. And it's like, yeah, in the meantime, they're just going, yep, they love Mexico. That's all the
Yep.
Republicans have to say. And it's like, oh shit. So yeah, if that breaks through, that's a good sign because this is a propaganda war. And I think we are on the right side of that war because we actually have the truth and the law and a belief in the actual things that make America good. But if we're having to explain it to, but he's got a Mexican flag, then
Yep.
it's like, oh, fuck's sake. Yes, he had a Mexican flag. And then you're back in the loop. And someone said this to me who was a strategist, like, we have Democrats have to stop fighting this battle on Republican terms because they're so good. Whether they're seizing a message on trans rights or Medicaid, oh they're just trying to live off the state, whatever it is. We constantly are fighting on their turf, and I think you're right. We have to push it back to them and say, a masked, unmarked police person dragging away a pregnant woman or whatever. We know that's not America, and
Yep.
that will resonate and hopefully be true. And if people are getting that, that's really a positive sign. So it's nice to hear something positive in these dark fucking days. Um, I'm conscious of time, and I really appreciate you giving your time to chat with me and give me this report from again the bunker, as it were. The one person who might have come out well in this is your your governor, good old Gavin Newsom, who I think is I haven't really enjoyed his moves lately post election, where he's been hanging out with Steve Bannon and Charlie Kirk and kissing their ass. Um, like I said, have you enjoyed Gavin Newsom's podcast?
So I have
And
not been
and
listening to this podcast.
and I mean, has he come out strong? I mean, how are Californians feeling about how Gavin has stood up to Trump?
There's definitely been a rally around the flag effect, and
Yeah.
Newsom has effectively harnessed that, as have LA Mayor Karen Bass. They've
Mm.
both become applauded in ways that they were not being beforehand because they're both fairly unpopular.
Yeah.
And it's frustrating to me because it's like, when it comes to actually governing better, you can't get them on the phone, it feels like. But then it's like, oh, someone needs to lead an army, I'm gonna be your knight in shining armor on both counts. And I'm glad someone's fulfilling that role. I think
Mm.
it's they're doing it well. It's just like where were you on housing policy, Gavin?
Yeah.
Where were you on when we needed you to actually help fix stuff in LA? You're in Ghana or whatever, in Karen Bass's case. But
Yeah.
then, you know, um, look, if you're rallying behind someone in a proverbial battle, and it's the king on your front lines, you're rallying to them and you're not really thinking about what they did about zoning laws 15 months ago. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
The crisis. I mean this can be what makes these people rise to the next level. But and so I wanted to end on that because I know you're passionate about housing advocacy and housing rights and so on. Obviously, with the fires that you guys suffered in January, I mean, how are things going on that battle? Because I know you've been working on housing issues for fair housing and people, all of those things for a long time. Is that upended? Because it's hard to know again from a distance, like the
yeah.
devastation that you had. What's been
So
the
the
impact of that?
devastation, or basically, as I said, LA has about like 100 neighborhoods or whatever, some hundreds. There are basically two that got severely affected. Pasadena, or no, Pacific Palisades, which is on the west side, is not far from me. And then Altadena, which is more inland up in the foothills of the Santa Monica Mountains or the Sierra Madre.
Hmm.
Or I might be getting that wrong. But yeah. So it did, and there's been a lot of recrimination as to who is to
Mm,
blame for it
sure.
locally. Karen Bass, I don't know if you have heard this story, but was while the
Yep.
fires struck, was in Ghana attending the presidential inauguration of the newly elected president there, which was
Yep.
aggravating, especially because it
I
was
mean,
not, if it was a vacation, look, if it's a vacation in personal capacity, fine. Like I would be
yeah.
okay with it. But when you're spending our taxpayer money to go to Ghana, like what benefit does this have to
I
Los
mean,
Angeles where you are the mayor? And I think it kind of like, ties in with her sort of lackadaisical attitude towards governing in general here on a
sure.
number of it. So that's been frustrating. There has been a sense of urgency around rebuilding.
Hmm.
Um, that said, it hasn't really translated into that much yet.
Yeah.
So the recovery czar was like frozen out, and then, you know, it termed out after a couple months, and you know, there's like arguments about how should we rebuild? How should we rebuild? Should we change the land use to be more resilient or more, or less expensive and low density, et cetera, et cetera. And very little has gotten built. Stuff is still getting cleaned up. Um, it's still not a fixed situation, and in the meantime, it's made the situation, as people in the housing space were warning from day one. It's made the situation in the rest of the city that much worse because you have all these people who, had lost their homes and now they need to find other places in the area to live. And there's
Sure.
already a shortage of housing and, atrociously high housing costs, and now they're going up even further. Um, so I don't think the city has risen to the occasion. I don't think the Bass administration has. But at the state level, there has been more action, and that's been generally where housing advocates have been pushing because they've
Hmm.
been running ahead of localities on reforming housing policies. Uh, and that it also was one of the cases where Bass really took a hit over to her popularity over the response to that. And now, this is maybe a second chance for her to handle this one a bit
Hmm.
better. And it's probably logistically easier because it's mostly a war of words and a war of lawsuits rather than, the difficult things of reforming the LA
Actual
building
governing.
stuff. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so, from a political standpoint, I can't say how it would play out, but it's probably a positive for both of them. But, um, you know, uh, overall, we still have some things to do to get our own house in order. Uh,
Sure. Well, it doesn't help if Trump is coming after the very people that would likely build the houses that you need. So
yeah,
that doesn't help either.
that's a big problem too. It's like, you're working on housing reform and changing these laws and stuff, and then, the second you seem to have some momentum and success, all of a sudden, oh, building supplies are twice as expensive. Half the labor force is, in Central America and all this. So it's really frustrating. And
Yep.
um, yeah, I wish I had a clear solution, but it's more just, put one foot in front of the other, hope for the best, and hopefully the Trump administration will not be long for this earth, but you never know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the good news is you can invest in our sponsor, the new Trump mobile phones, the gold cell phone, I should say, that definitely that is going to be made in China. Um, Toby, thank you so much for taking time to kind of update us and give a reality check on what's happened in Los Angeles. And it's good to connect. And good luck with all of the housing initiatives you have. And it'd be great to talk to you again.
Sounds great. Pleasure talking to you as always, and have a great day.
Well, there we go. Brilliant to catch up with Toby. Informative, talking to somebody who's been there and is living the actual experience of what's happening, especially in Los Angeles, when there's so many things that are talked about in the news. The reality of what it was like in LA as the alleged riots were burning the city to the ground when he's living just 10 miles away in a larger part of Los Angeles, which is a massive city, and saying that it's not really the reality of what you might see on TV. So watch out what the media is telling you. Apparently, more Americans are getting their news from social media now, so it means they must be watching this podcast. But yeah, thank you to Toby for coming back on. Make sure to check out his socials. They're all linked down below in the descriptions. Thank you for watching or listening, subscribing, doing all those things you need to do. And we will see you next time. Thanks a lot. Bye bye.